Hey everybody, Matt here with Take Roads Less Traveled, and today on the Avalanche, we are going to be adjusting the parking brake. This is actually a pretty simple job to do, but it's a little different from a lot of trucks that you may be used to doing this on. So we're going to dive right in, show you exactly how to do this. All right, so the reason that I am doing this is you can see I've got my parking brake set, parking brake light is on, all that good stuff. And if I take and put the truck into drive, let off the brake, she actually still moves, and that is not a good thing. It's not what I want. Parking brake should not allow your vehicle to move when you put it in gear. It should still hold it, and so that is why we're having to adjust the parking brake, because just over time it loosens up. And if I do this real quick, you guys can see I've got 215,000 miles on my truck, almost 216,000 miles, and I've replaced the parking brake shoes once, and from what all I can tell is that the originals were still from the factory, and just over time these loosen up and everything, and you have to go in and adjust them. So let's show you how it's done. On most trucks, you'll find that the adjustment of your parking brake is actually very simple, simply due to the design including a small adjustment bracket that has a through bolt that you just take and tighten up, and that will tighten up your parking brake cable. It's not the case on these 99 to 06 GM full-size trucks and SUVs. Typically, like I said, you would have an adjustment bracket, and it would usually be, you know, right around the driver's door of the frame. Well, you can see there's that cable right there, which is our parking brake, and there's no adjuster. Now, there is what looks to be one, but that's not actually an adjuster. That's just simply joining that front section of cable to the rear section of cable. That runs all the way back, and from there we actually don't have any other way to adjust our cable. Again, right here you're like, oh, there's another bracket. Nope, that's not an adjuster. All that does is join another section of cable. In order to be able to tighten up your parking brake, you actually have to take the back wheels off. So we're going to get the truck lifted up, we're going to take these off, but first just loosen up your lug nuts just a little bit. Just break the torque spec on them while the wheels are still on the ground, and then jack the vehicle up with the front wheels chocked, and you can go ahead and get the lug nuts off the rest of the way, supporting the rear end with jack stands. Now that we have the truck's rear wheels and tires taken off, we now need to be able to take this rear brake rotor off. In order to do that, you have to remove the caliper, which is held on by two 12mm bolts on the back side of it, one at the top, one at the bottom. And then as well, we need to take off this caliper bracket, which is held on by two 18mm bolts. Again, one near the top, one near the bottom. Let's go ahead and get those off so that we can get this rotor off. One thing you may run into while doing this is this small nut right here may spin with that caliper bolt. If it does that, don't worry, you're not stuck. You're still gonna be able to get this job done. All you're gonna want is a crescent wrench, fit it to the size of that nut, get your ratchet back on, loosen that nut up a little bit, and from there, you should be good to go. Pull that out the rest of the way. Once those are off, just take a screwdriver and gently pry back on your caliper. Loosen that off. You may need to do the top and the bottom in order to get it to come all the way off. Just try not to bend those shims that are placed there. Otherwise, you will need to replace them. This can be a little bit of a pain sometimes, but with patience and a little wiggling, you can get it off. All right, so now that we have the caliper and the caliper bracket off, now we can get to the task of adjusting this parking brake. Now, if I grab the rotor and I go to pull it off, that comes off very, very easily, and should be a little bit tougher than that. It shouldn't slide off quite that easily. So that tells me that I need to adjust my parking brake. If come down here, you guys can see right here, here's my adjuster. It has all these little teeth on it, And if I spin that, it will spread these two shoes out away from each other, which puts more tension on it. Now this is supposed to be a self-adjusting tensioner. And to be quite honest, I hate them. I absolutely hate these things. They don't really work as well as they're supposed to, which is what happens over time. They just gradually loosen up, and while they're supposed to self-adjust, they just don't. And so we've got to come in here and we've got to rotate this. So let's get a small screwdriver and let's spread these shoes out a little bit. Now, what you're gonna do is you're just gonna take a small screwdriver, put it in between the slots of these gear teeth, and you're just gonna give it a little push. And you'll notice that that spins. And what that is doing is it's pushing this screw out, which is expanding out the shoes for the parking brake. Now, you don't wanna go too far. Exact clearances on this is that your shoe surface should be 0.026 millimeters away from the inside surface of your rotor. That's a little hard to measure sometimes. So once you make a few adjustments, just take and get your rotor in place and slide it on. And you can take and grab the edges and rotate. And you can listen for any drag. I have just a hair of drag, which tells me I'm in a pretty good position. So with that being the case, I'm gonna come back and rotate the opposite way, just like 3 clicks. That was a little too much. There we go. I'll try it again. And now, that actually feels really, really good. So now we can do the other side after we get our brake hardware put back on and put everything back together. When you're reinstalling all of your brake hardware, like the caliper bracket and the caliper itself and your pads, it's just like any other brake job. This is a great time to take some brake cleaner, come on in here and clean up your shims, clean up all of your hardware, just to make sure that everything's in good working order. One of the things that you're probably going to need to do as well is pop the hood of your truck and open up your master cylinder reservoir. The reason for this is because you're probably going to need to go ahead and compress your caliper pistons in just a little bit using a C-clamp. What this does is this allows you to get your caliper back over top of your pads without damaging anything, because that's honestly the last thing you want to do. If you clean all of your components, reapply a little bit of grease on your shims and on your pads as well, just so you don't have any metal on metal squeaking while operating your brakes. And then once all that's done, we can start to put it back together and we'll torque everything back down to spec. Now that we have the caliper bracket cleaned up and mostly bolted in place, we're ready to torque it down. Now this is where the fun part comes in. Those two 18mm bolts need to be torqued to 148 foot-pounds. That is really tight, but that's where torque wrenches come in handy. Like I said, the rest of actually getting the caliper on is just like doing a normal brake pad job. So we're going to grease up our pads, grease up our shims, get them put in, and get the brake pad put on. So we can get these snugged up. 12mm. Now, come back with our torque wrench and set them to 31 foot-pounds. Now, that nut is spinning on me again. Let's take my crescent wrench. Get it on there. There we Still wanting to spin a little bit. Nut is wanting to spin on me just a little bit. So, get it around to the flat surfaces. Right there. Get my adjustable on there. And set that to 31 foot-pounds. Do the same for the bottom. That one's not spinning, thankfully. There we go. Now, I just need to repeat this entire process on the driver's side and test my parking brake after I reseat these pads by going for just a short drive down the road, getting it up to 25 miles an hour, doing 2 steady, slow stops, and then 2 hard stops, all from 25 miles an hour. That'll set my pads, and then I can check my parking brake, make sure everything is adjusted properly. Fun part is that if I still don't like it, I have to take everything back off and do it again. But that's why it's so important to do lots of trial fitments when you're adjusting that gear. Go ahead and make a few adjustments, get your rotor on there, spin it, listen for that drag, feel that drag, and then once you're happy with where it's at, where you're not dragging continually on the inside of the rotor, get everything put back together and you should be good to go. Now that we have our brakes set, everything's been torqued, wheels have been torqued back down to 150 or 140 foot-pounds, sorry about that. 140 foot-pounds for the wheel lug nuts. Now we can do a quick test on this parking brake, make sure it works. So we'll set it, and it's got a little more tension than it had before. I let off the brake, I don't move. I give it a little gas, and I just barely move. So in all reality, I could probably adjust this a little bit more and get that to tighten up a little bit. Probably, in all honesty, I could probably adjust the passenger side just a little bit more. But right now, I put it in park, I put the brake on, and she holds. So for now, I may just leave it, but I'll probably come back to it and tighten it up a little bit more, and we'll go from there. But that is how you adjust your parking brake on these 99 to 06 GMT 800 is Chevy trucks and their full-size SUVs and all that good stuff. So anyway, hope this helps, and I will see you on the roads less traveled.